Officer Martinez had sworn to protect all citizens equally when he raised his right hand 12 years ago, promising to serve without prejudice, without hatred, without bias. But when he saw the hijab-wearing pregnant woman kneeling on her prayer rug in Riverside Park, those same hands that took an oath to serve and protect would become instruments of religious persecution that would destroy everything he thought he knew about justice. Before we dive into this shocking story that will leave you speechless, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because stories like these need to be heard. Now let's go back to where it all began. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park as Amira Hassan spread her prayer rug beneath the old oak tree. 6 months pregnant, she moved carefully, her hand instinctively protecting her growing belly as she prepared for ASR prayer. The park was nearly empty, just a few joggers on distant paths and children playing by the fountain. This quiet corner had become her sanctuary, a place where she could connect with Allah during her lunch breaks from the medical clinic where she worked as a nurse practitioner. Amira had chosen this spot deliberately, away from foot traffic, respectful of others, causing no disturbance. She'd been coming here for 3 months, ever since her pregnancy made it difficult to drive home and return to work within her break time. The park was public space, open to all, and she had every legal right to pray here. But legal rights and social acceptance were two very different things in a city where Islamophobia simmered just beneath the surface of polite conversation. As she began her prayers, facing east toward Mecca, Amira was unaware that Officer Danny Martinez was watching her from his patrol car parked 50 yards away. Martinez, a 12-year veteran of the Riverside Police Department, had received a call 20 minutes earlier from Mrs. Henderson, a frequent complainant who lived in the apartments overlooking the park. "There's a suspicious person in the park," Henderson had reported, her voice tight with barely concealed disgust. "Middle Eastern looking, doing some kind of ritual. It looks like terrorist training to me." Martinez had sighed when he took the call. Mrs. Henderson called at least twice a week about suspicious activity that usually turned out to be teenagers skateboarding or homeless people sleeping on benches. But department policy required response to all calls, no matter how frivolous they seemed. As he approached the scene, Martinez felt his perspective shift from routine annoyance to something more troubling. The woman was clearly Muslim, her hijab and prayer posture unmistakable. And in Martinez's mind, shaped by years of post-9/11 media consumption and departmental training that emphasized Islamic extremism as a primary threat, Muslim prayer in public spaces triggered automatic suspicion. He didn't consider that she might be a healthcare worker taking a quiet moment for worship. He didn't think about her rights as an American citizen. He saw what 12 years of bias training had taught him to see: potential threat. Martinez radioed for backup. "Unit 47 to dispatch. I have eyes on suspicious subject in Riverside Park. Female, Middle Eastern appearance, engaged in ritualistic behavior. Requesting additional units for investigation." The words felt official, professional, justified. He was following protocol, protecting the community, doing his job. That's what he told himself as he watched Amira prostrate herself in prayer, her pregnant form vulnerable and peaceful beneath the afternoon sun. Within 8 minutes, 3 patrol cars had arrived. Officers Johnson, Rodriguez, and Thompson emerged from their vehicles with hands resting on their weapons, approaching the praying woman with tactical caution typically reserved for armed suspects. They had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. They had no idea that this quiet, pregnant Muslim woman kneeling in prayer was married to the most powerful man in the Riverside County justice system. But they were about to find out. As Amira completed her prayers and began folding her rug, completely unaware of the approaching officers, she was thinking about her unborn child. Boy or girl, she wondered, and what kind of world would this baby inherit? Would it be a place where Muslims could worship freely, work proudly, contribute meaningfully to society? Or would it be a world where prayer in parks brought police instead of peace? She was about to discover the answer in the most terrifying way possible. "Ma'am, step away from the bag and put your hands where we can see them." Officer Martinez's voice cut through the peaceful afternoon air like a blade, shattering the tranquility that Amira had found in prayer. She looked up, startled, to see 4 armed police officers arranged in a semicircle around her, their hands hovering over their weapons, their faces hard with suspicion and something else, something that made her blood run cold. Amira slowly rose to her feet, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. "Officers, is there a problem?" Her voice remained calm despite the fear creeping up her throat. As a healthcare worker, she understood the importance of de-escalation, of remaining composed under pressure. But nothing in her medical training had prepared her for the hatred she saw in their eyes. "The problem," Officer Johnson stepped forward, his voice dripping with disdain, "is that we've received reports of suspicious activity, ritualistic behavior that could be training exercises." He gestured toward her prayer rug with disgust. "What exactly were you doing here?" The accusation hit Amira like a physical blow. Training exercises? She had been praying, engaging in one of the 5 daily prayers that formed the foundation of her faith. "I was praying, officers. This is a public park, and I have every right to..." "Right?" Officer Rodriguez interrupted with a harsh laugh. "You people think you have rights to do whatever you want, wherever you want. Well, this is America, not whatever Middle Eastern country you crawled out of." The word struck Amira with devastating force. "I was born in Detroit," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm an American citizen. I'm a nurse practitioner at Riverside Medical Center. I was simply taking a prayer break during my lunch hour." But her calm explanation only seemed to inflame the officers further. Officer Thompson, who had remained silent until now, stepped closer. "Sure you are. And I suppose that little performance we just watched was just innocent prayer, right? Not memorizing positions for bomb-making or planning attacks." The accusation was so absurd, so divorced from reality, that Amira almost laughed. Almost. But the hands on weapons, the circle of hostile faces, the complete dehumanization in their voices stopped any humor cold. She was 6 months pregnant, alone, surrounded by armed men who saw her not as a fellow American, not as a healthcare worker who had spent the pandemic saving lives, but as an enemy. "Officers, please," she tried again, her medical training kicking in, her voice adopting the calm, professional tone she used with agitated patience. "I understand there may have been a misunderstanding, but I assure you I was simply praying. If you'd like to contact my supervisor at the medical center..." "Shut up," Martinez snapped. "We'll ask the questions here. Empty your bag. Now." Amira's hands moved to her small purse, but the simple action triggered an immediate escalation. "Slowly," Johnson shouted, his hand moving to his weapon. "Keep your hands visible." The humiliation burned through her as she slowly emptied her purse onto the ground. Her medical ID, her stethoscope, her hospital badge, prenatal vitamins, a sandwich she'd planned to eat after prayer, her phone, her wallet. The mundane contents of a working woman's life scattered on the grass like evidence at a crime scene. Officer Rodriguez kicked at her stethoscope with his boot. Medical professional. Probably learned chemistry to make explosives. He picked up her hospital ID, examining it with theatrical suspicion. "These can be faked. Terrorists are getting more sophisticated." The word hung in the air like poison. Terrorist. Not citizen. Not neighbor. Not the woman who had worked 18-hour shifts during COVID-19, who had held dying patients' hands when their families couldn't visit, who had administered vaccines to protect the very community these officers claimed to serve. Terrorist. "I think we need to search her more thoroughly," Thompson suggested, his voice taking on a tone that made Amira's skin crawl. "She could be hiding weapons under those robes." "I'm pregnant," Amira said, her voice finally betraying the fear that was consuming her. "Please, you're scaring me. I haven't done anything wrong." "Pregnant?" Martinez laughed coldly. "Probably just strapping on fake belly to hide explosives. We've seen it before." He turned to his colleagues. "Get the water." Amira's blood turned to ice. "Water? What are you?" Rodriguez was already walking back to his patrol car, returning with a large water bottle. "Let's see how dedicated you are to your little prayer ritual when you're soaking wet. Real Americans don't kneel in dirt like animals." The first splash of cold water hit her hijab, soaking through to her hair, running down her face. Amira gasped, instinctively covering her belly, trying to protect her unborn child from the assault. "Stop. Please, you can't." "Can't what?" Johnson poured more water over her head, the liquid streaming down her prayer clothes, turning the dirt beneath her feet to mud. This is what happens when you bring your terrorist activities to our parks. As the water soaked through her clothes, as the officers laughed at her distress, as her hijab clung wet and heavy to her head, Amira made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "Put that down," Martinez shouted, but Amira was already dialing. One number, 7 digits that would transform this moment of humiliation into the biggest scandal in Riverside County history. "David," she whispered into the phone, her voice breaking for the first time. "David, they're hurting me. They're hurting our baby. I need you to come to Riverside Park. Now." The officers exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. Martinez stepped forward to grab the phone, but something in Amira's voice, something in the way she said that name, David, made him hesitate. They were about to discover that some phone calls change everything. And this was one of them. The phone call lasted exactly 43 seconds. 43 seconds that would haunt officers Martinez, Johnson, Rodriguez, and Thompson for the rest of their careers. As Amira ended the call, her wet hijab clinging to her face, her pregnant form shivering in the afternoon breeze, something had shifted in the atmosphere of Riverside Park. "Who did you just call?" Martinez demanded, snatching at the phone, but Amira pulled it against her chest protectively. For the first time since this nightmare began, there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not fear, not submission, something that made the officers suddenly uncomfortable. "My husband," she said quietly, wiping water from her face. "He'll be here in 10 minutes. Officer Johnson laughed, but sounded forced now. "Your husband? What's he going to do? Bring more prayer rugs?" The other officers chuckled, but their laughter felt hollow in the charged air. Amira didn't respond. She simply sat down carefully on her wet prayer rug, one hand protectively cradling her belly, the other holding her phone. Her silence was more unnerving than any threat she could have made. Rodriguez kicked at the scattered contents of her purse, probably calling some terrorist cell to come rescue her. "We should arrest her right now for making terrorist threats." "I made no threats," Amira said calmly. "I simply called my husband and told him where I was. That's not illegal, even in your version of America." The quiet dignity in her voice, even soaked and humiliated, began to penetrate the officer's bravado. Martinez found himself studying her hospital ID more carefully. Dr. Amira Hassan, MD, nurse practitioner, Riverside Medical Center. Emergency department. The ID looked legitimate. Very legitimate. "Thompson," Martinez said quietly, "run her name through the system." As Thompson walked back to his patrol car to check her information, Johnson continued the harassment. "So your husband's coming? Huh? Let me guess. Taxi driver? Convenience store owner? Or maybe he's unemployed like most of your people." Amira's eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady. "My people, Officer Johnson. You mean Americans? Healthcare workers? Taxpayers? Citizens who contribute to this community?" "I mean Muslims," Johnson snarled. "I mean people who don't belong here, who come to our country and try to change it into whatever backwards place you came from." "I was born in Detroit," Amira repeated, her voice carrying a new edge. "I went to medical school at University of Michigan. I've lived in this county for 8 years. I've paid more in taxes than you probably make in salary. And I've saved more lives in the past month than you have in your entire career." The assertion hung in the air like a challenge. Martinez felt something cold forming in his stomach. This woman wasn't behaving like the stereotypical victim they'd expected. There was an authority in her voice, a confidence that suggested she knew something they didn't. Thompson jogged back from his patrol car, his face pale. "Martinez, we got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "She's clean. Completely clean. Not even a parking ticket. And her medical license." Thompson's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's not just a nurse practitioner. She's got an MD. She's a doctor. Emergency medicine. Worked COVID units throughout the pandemic. Hospital administrator. Board certified. This woman is what?" Martinez demanded. "Legitimate. Completely legitimate." "And Martinez." Thompson's voice cracked slightly. "The address on her license, that's Hillcrest Drive. The expensive houses. The ones where judges and politicians live." The implications began to sink in. Martinez felt his confident brutality wavering. "Run the husband's name." "What's his name?" Thompson asked. All 4 officers turned to look at Amira, who was checking her phone. 8 minutes, she said softly, not looking up at them. What's your husband's name? Martinez demanded. For the first time since this encounter began, Amira smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who knew the exact moment when justice would arrive. You'll meet him soon enough. Rodriguez, growing increasingly agitated by her calm confidence, grabbed another water bottle from his car. Maybe she needs another shower to cool down that attitude. But as he approached, Martinez grabbed his arm. Wait for what? Martinez was studying Amira more carefully now. The expensive clothes beneath the traditional hijab, the Rolex watch on her wrist, the confidence that came not from arrogance, but from someone accustomed to authority, to respect, to being listened to when she spoke. Thompson, check the registration on all vehicles parked within 3 blocks. Cross-reference with her address. As Thompson hurried away, Amira's phone buzzed. A text message. She read it and nodded slightly. 5 minutes, she announced. The officers exchanged glances. The certainty that had driven their harassment was crumbling, replaced by the growing realization that they might have made a terrible mistake. Martinez's radio crackled. Unit 47, this is dispatch. We're getting calls about your location. Multiple complaints about officer conduct in Riverside Park. What's your status? Martinez keyed his radio reluctantly. Status is under control, dispatch. Copy that. But Martinez, the calls are coming from some important people. Real important. Handle this clean. Important people. Martinez felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool breeze. Thompson sprinted back, his face now ash gray. Martinez, we need to talk. Right now. Away from her. The 4 officers huddled 20 feet away, their voices urgent whispers. Amira remained seated on her prayer rug, checking her watch, completely calm for the first time in 30 minutes. The car, Thompson whispered. Black BMW registered to the same address. But that's not the bad news. The bad news is the personalized license plate. What does it say? Thompson's voice was barely audible. Judge 1. The world stopped spinning. Amira's phone rang. She answered on the first ring. I'm here, she said simply, looking toward the park entrance. A black BMW pulled into the parking lot, and Officer Martinez felt his career ending before the driver even stepped out of the car. Judge David Hassan stepped out of his black BMW with the measured calm of a man who had spent 15 years presiding over the most important courtroom in Riverside County. At 6'2", with graying temples and the quiet authority that came from sending criminals to prison and overturning unjust convictions, he commanded respect wherever he went. But today, as he saw his pregnant wife sitting soaked and humiliated on a prayer rug surrounded by 4 police officers, something primal and dangerous flickered in his eyes. Amira, his voice carried across the park, gentle when addressing his wife, but with an undertone that made the officer's blood freeze. Are you hurt? Officer Martinez felt his legs turn to water. Judge David Hassan, not just any judge. The chief judge of Riverside County Superior Court. The man who had presided over Martinez's own disciplinary hearing 3 years ago for excessive force. The man who decided police misconduct cases. The man whose wife they had just terrorized and soaked with water for the crime of praying while Muslim. I'm okay now, Amira replied, rising carefully from her prayer rug. But David, they poured water on me. They called me a terrorist. They said I was training for bomb making. Her voice finally broke on the last words. 6 months of pregnancy hormones and 30 minutes of pure hatred finally overwhelming her composure. Judge Hassan's jaw tightened as he took in the scene. His wife's soaked hijab, her scattered belongings, the empty water bottles in the officer's hands, the fear still lingering in her eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Officers, I am Judge David Hassan of the Riverside County Superior Court. You will step away from my wife immediately. The transformation was instantaneous and devastating. Johnson's arrogant sneer vanished. Rodriguez dropped his water bottle like it had burst into flames. Thompson actually stumbled backward. Martinez felt his career imploding in real time. Judge Hassan, Martinez stammered. We were responding to a call about suspicious activity. We had no idea. No idea about what? The judge's voice cut like a scalpel. No idea that my wife is an American citizen? No idea that she's a medical doctor who has saved countless lives? No idea that praying in a public park is constitutionally protected? Or no idea that your actions constitute religious persecution, civil rights violations, and assault on a pregnant woman? Each word landed like a physical blow. The officers realized they weren't just facing angry husband. They were facing the man who would likely preside over their criminal trials. Judge Hassan approached his wife, gently placing his suit jacket around her wet shoulders. "Sweetheart, tell me exactly what happened." "Everything." As Amira recounted the harassment, the terrorist accusations, the water assault, the judge's expression grew darker. When she finished, silence hung over the park like storm clouds. "Officers," Judge Hassan said, his voice deadly calm, "you have just committed multiple felonies in my presence. Assault, battery, civil rights violations under federal law, religious persecution, harassment of a pregnant woman." He paused, letting each charge sink in. "I am a sworn officer of the court, and I am legally obligated to report these crimes." Martinez found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Sir, we were just doing our jobs. Following protocol." Judge Hassan's laugh was bitter and cold. "Protocol? Officer Martinez, I've reviewed your personnel file. This is your third excessive force complaint this year. And Officer Johnson, your disciplinary record shows a pattern of targeting minorities." He turned to Rodriguez and Thompson. "As for you two, you've just participated in what will become a federal hate crime investigation." The judge pulled out his phone. "I'm calling 3 numbers. First, the FBI Civil Rights Division. Second, the District Attorney's Office. Third, the media. By tomorrow morning, this incident will be front-page news across the country." "Please, sir," Thompson begged. "We have families, mortgages. We can't lose our jobs over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding." Judge Hassan's voice rose for the first time, raw emotion breaking through his judicial composure. "You soaked my pregnant wife with water and called her a terrorist for praying. You humiliated a doctor who spent the pandemic saving lives. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was hatred." Rodriguez, desperate now, tried one last appeal. "Judge, we're sorry. We made a mistake. Can't we just work this out?" Judge Hassan stared at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "Officer Rodriguez, in 15 years on the bench, I have seen every excuse, every justification, every attempt to minimize bigotry and hatred. But what I witnessed today wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose to see a terrorist instead of citizen. You chose to see an enemy instead of a neighbor. You chose hatred over humanity." He helped Amira to her feet, gathering her belongings with tender care. "You 4 officers will be suspended by morning. You will face federal charges. You will lose your badges, your pensions, your futures. And you know what the worst part is?" The officers waited in terrified silence. "My wife will forgive you, because that's who she is. But I won't, and neither will the law." As Judge Hassan guided his wife toward their car, he made one final announcement that would echo through every police station in the county. "Oh, and officers, I'll be presiding over your trials personally. I look forward to seeing you in my courtroom." The black BMW drove away, leaving 4 officers standing in the ruins of their careers, finally understanding that justice delayed is not justice denied. 6 months later, Judge David Hassan sat in his chambers reviewing the final paperwork that would close the most significant civil rights case in Riverside County history. The early morning sunlight streamed through his windows as he signed the last document, officially ending the careers of 4 police officers and setting a precedent that would reshape law enforcement training across the nation. The transformation had been swift and absolute. Within 48 hours of the park incident, FBI agents had arrested officers Martinez, Johnson, Rodriguez, and Thompson on federal hate crime charges. The body camera footage from their patrol cars, combined with witness testimony from park visitors, had created an airtight case that even the most expensive defense attorneys couldn't challenge. Martinez received 18 months in federal prison and permanent disbarment from law enforcement. Johnson, whose disciplinary record revealed a pattern of targeting minorities, got 2 years. Rodriguez and Thompson, despite their pleas for leniency, each received 15 months. All 4 lost their pensions, their benefits, and any possibility of working in law enforcement again. But the individual consequences were just the beginning. The case had triggered a Department of Justice investigation into the entire Riverside Police Department, revealing systematic bias training that had taught officers to view Muslim prayer as suspicious activity. The Federal Review uncovered 43 similar incidents over the past 3 years. Muslims harassed while praying, shopping while wearing hijabs, or simply existing while visibly Islamic. Amira entered the chamber carrying their newborn daughter, Layla, born healthy and perfect 3 months after the incident. She had returned to work at the medical center to standing ovations from colleagues who had watched her transform from victim to catalyst for change. "The settlement papers?" she asked softly, settling into the chair across from her husband's desk. "Finalized," David replied. $12 million from the city. All of it going to the Civil Rights Education Foundation we're establishing. The money had never been about personal gain. From the moment they decided to pursue legal action, both David and Amira had committed to using any settlement to prevent future victims from experiencing what she had endured. David's phone buzzed with a text from the FBI Civil Rights Division. The Riverside Police Department case had become a model for federal intervention in systemic bias. 17 other police departments across the country were now under similar investigations, all triggered by the precedent set in Hassan versus Riverside PD. "The training program starts next week," Amira said, gently rocking their daughter. "Every police academy in California will be required to complete the Hassan Protocol before graduation." The Hassan Protocol, 40 hours of mandatory training that included Islamic culture education, constitutional rights review, and bias recognition. It featured video testimony from Amira herself, telling her story to new recruits, showing them exactly how assumptions become actions, how prejudice becomes persecution. David stood and walked to his window, overlooking the park where everything had changed. Riverside Park now featured a permanent memorial, not to the incident, but to the principle of religious freedom. A simple plaque that read, "In a free society, prayer is never suspicious." "Mrs. Henderson called yesterday," Amira said quietly. "The woman who reported me." David turned, surprised. The elderly woman whose initial complaint had triggered the entire incident had become something of a pariah in the community once her role became public. "She wants to apologize," Amira continued. "In person. She's been attending the mosque community outreach programs, learning about Islam. She says she's ashamed of what her fear and ignorance caused." This was typical of his wife, David thought. Even after everything she'd endured, Amira remained committed to education over retribution, healing over hatred. "Will you meet with her?" Amira looked down at their daughter, who had inherited her father's dark eyes and her mother's gentle smile. "Yes, Layla should grow up in a world where people can change, where mistakes can lead to understanding instead of just punishment." David's computer chimed with an email from the Council on American Islamic Relations. The Hassan case had inspired similar lawsuits in 12 states, creating a nationwide conversation about religious profiling and police bias. What had begun as 30 minutes of harassment in a park had become a catalyst for systemic change across American law enforcement. At 2 p.m., David would drive to Riverside Park for the dedication ceremony of the new Community Interfaith Center, built with part of the settlement funds. Religious leaders from every faith tradition in the county would participate, creating a space where prayer was not just tolerated but celebrated. As they prepared to leave chambers, Amira paused at the door. "David, do you think they learn anything?" Martinez and the others. David considered the question. During their trials, all 4 officers had offered apologies that seemed genuine. Martinez had specifically requested to speak at police training seminars about the dangers of assumption-based policing. Johnson had begun volunteering with civil rights organizations. "I think," David said carefully, "that sometimes people need to lose everything to find their humanity." They walked together through the courthouse halls, past the portrait of Judge Hassan that would hang there for generations, past the memorial case displaying the congressional resolution condemning religious profiling that had been passed unanimously after their case gained national attention. Outside, protesters no longer gathered. The angry crowds that had initially supported the officers have been replaced by something more hopeful. Families of every background using the park safely, children playing together regardless of their parents' faith, and yes, Muslims praying openly without fear. As they drove toward Riverside Park, Amira noticed something that made her smile. A young Muslim woman was spreading her prayer rug beneath the same oak tree where this story had begun. But now, instead of hostile officers, she was surrounded by joggers who nodded respectfully as they passed, families who smiled and waved, and a community that had learned to see prayer as beautiful rather than suspicious. Justice, Amira reflected, wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation. And sometimes, the most powerful victories came not from destroying your enemies, but from turning them into allies. The Hassan Protocol would train tens of thousands of officers. The settlement would fund civil rights education for decades. The precedent would protect countless future victims. But perhaps most importantly, their daughter Layla would grow up in a world slightly more just than the one her parents had inherited. And in that small victory, the entire struggle had been worth it. Change, it turned out, sometimes began with 30 minutes of injustice and ended with a lifetime of progress.